Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 13th of October 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, the weather as reported from Cardiff is dry and overcast. And I think we'll leave it there because that sums up the political situation at the moment, Mike.
Yes, although a piece of good news to start off with, because here's Chris Gidmore, and he's saying Happy Local Democracy Week. So this is Local Democracy Week. I realise we're late in reporting it, but since the main feature of today's news is local democracy.
Is this man over 14?
I'm not sure.
Clearly very experienced in the Constitution.
Right, so yes, he is Minister for the Constitution. This would be the Constitution which the government says Britain doesn't have, but he's the Minister for it anyway. And he looks like he has huge amounts of venerable experience in constitutional affairs. Yes.
Frightening.
Yes. So let's move on. Now, we're going to go back a year or two because in July 2015, this man, George Osborne, was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he gave his normal budget speech. And he, in the budget speech, there was this little catchphrase, indeed, the sale of government assets this year, 2015, 2016, will deliver the largest privatisation proceeds of all times, higher than the previous record in 1987. Well, when he made that announcement, that piqued my interest, and I tried to find out what did he mean by it. So I wrote to the Treasury, there's the Treasury building, and asked them what did he mean by it. And they basically said, well, have a look at what's publicly available. And so I did. And of course, the list of publicly available privatizations were big ticket items, such as sale of shares in Eurostar, whatever's remaining, the sale of remaining Royal Mail shares, assets held in Lloyds, Royal Bank of Scotland, UK Asset Resolution, which of course used to be the Halifax Bank of Scotland, Student Loans Company, King's Cross Property Developments, these types of things, big ticket items. And the Treasury simply refused to provide any evidence about smaller asset sales, and by that, all the land and buildings which were up for sale for a song to property developers right around the country. It's much too difficult, you see, because the Treasury doesn't seem to keep track of all these little insignificant assets. We're talking multiple millions of pounds, but they're only insignificant. So there's no searchable database, central searchable database of such sales, they said. But in the next sentence in the reply to me, they said, searches targeting the specific assets you mentioned return very high numbers of results. So at the time, I wasn't quite able to get my head around how they don't have a database, but they do have a database, and there's so many results returned from it that it would be far too expensive to actually give me the information that I want. So, you know, it did occur to me at the time that perhaps it was the Treasury's job to know what government departments were selling off. And if they don't know, for example, how do they know what money is being misappropriated? But anyway, that privatisation was going on, and it was all being done under the name of austerity. And, well, in the same time, in the same breath, David Cameron was busy continuing to push his big society model. This will all come together in a couple of seconds. But, of course, big society is simply a step forward from the third way, which Tony Blair initiated,
14, yeah.
Which demonstrates absolutely that both Cameron and Blair, despite being supposedly on opposite sides of the political fence, were basically pushing the same policy agenda. Now, at the heart of the big society, of course, is the idea of collaboration. Agencies collaborating in order to make sure that, well, they would say that no child that's at risk falls between the cracks, no more baby P incidents. Of course, anybody that's being radicalized is identified as early as possible. And so as a result, we've got programs like MAPPA, which is the Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements, or the PREVENT strategy. And these programs bring people working for local authorities, the police, schools, the National Health Service, charities, other non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations. They bring these to get people together in groups where they hold meetings and they basically collaborate. And of course, the problem with this is that it may well, they say, allegedly deal with children that aren't identified as being at risk because these agencies are collaborating with each other. But what it actually doesn't do is solve that problem, because these problems continue. What it does do is make sure that when these problems happen, that the cover-up can be very carefully managed, very creatively managed, because everybody's in one place at one time and they can discuss it. There's no independence in the police, for example. So how do you get a proper investigation of some kind of wrongdoing within the bodies themselves if they're all, in fact, working together? And of course, at the heart, as we said on that slide there, at the heart of the big society is localism, which is, we argue, centralized control at a local level. And an obvious case of this just this week, the fact that fracking in Lancashire has been given the go-ahead by the government. Now, this was a local decision that it should not go ahead. Central government said, no, we can't have local decisions being taken. We're going to make this a centralized decision and override so-called local democracy. This is what's at the heart of the big society and the whole constitutional change agenda that we've been talking about for quite a long time. So collaboration, organizations working together, so far in groups, in meetings, but not necessarily all in the same place. So here's how it all joins together. One public estate. Now, this is the front page of the invitation to apply from April this year. There's a new invitation to apply has gone out in September this year, and it's about to come to its close. But what is this? Well, this is a system that was launched in June 2013, jointly by the Cabinet Office and the Local Government Association. And of course, the whole constitutional change agenda is being driven from the Cabinet Office. It's described as a pioneering initiative, a major plank of government's investment strategy, because government is, quotes, committed to release the value of public sector assets, specifically land and property. So this goes back to Osborne, to his great privatisation, and this is one of the outcomes. It's all being done under the guise of austerity. So what are they doing? Well, they're privatising, they have, basically they're selling off land and buildings, and then they're putting local government, the police, central government, all kinds of government departments all together in one building. So it's not just a case, Brian, of any more collaborating on a project level. They're now going to be based in the same building with the same telephone switchboard, the same financial auditors, all the same infrastructure, and there is no separation of powers in this. The separation of powers completely goes. And just before you comment on this, just to give an impression, 159 councils are now working across 36 partnerships and they're set to join the next phase of the One Public Estate. Partnerships of councils and the wider public sector have been awarded a large amount of money to deliver land and property initiatives. This is now 50% of councils in England, we're talking, as you can see there, huge amounts of money. Local authorities in England hold £225 billion of assets, including 60 billion in property not used for schools or housing. By using assets more effectively, councils can create local economic growth. This is how they're describing it. It's all about local economic growth. It's all about efficiencies. It's about austerity. But of course, what it's actually doing in the process is bringing this infrastructure in place of localism, bringing centralized control to the local level, because central government departments will be in the same buildings as local government agencies.
And we were softened up to this, Mike, because of course we take somewhere like Nottingham or even Plymouth, we had individuals or groups of police officers, for example, moving into the local Nottingham government building and sharing office space. So this was to get people used to the idea that we didn't have separation of powers with the police, for example, but they were going to be working in alongside the council. And we have one disgraceful example with Nottingham City Council, where a man who was a police officer was not declaring that to members of the public. So when they were going in to express some unhappiness with the council, they weren't actually talking to a council official, they were talking to a policeman who wasn't declaring who he was. And of course, this opens up all sorts of abuses, from misreporting to bullying and a harassment, because what you say to a council official, you might not say direct to a policeman, depending on the circumstance. So this is very serious stuff. And I think probably we also ought to say that yesterday's news from UK column, at least, was very much on the fact that we've got this constant drive to war. And this is a very emotive subject. People are being drawn to what's happening in Syria, what the rhetoric is against Russia. While they are distracted on those overseas issues, this policy is all being driven through well, it's accelerating rapidly.
And the other distraction, of course, is Brexit, because this and everything else we're going to be talking about today are all policies which are being driven through whether we're in or out of the European Union.
Yeah.
So this is what we need to be looking at from a constitutional, a governance point of view. And of course, we shouldn't stop watching what's going on with Russia, because that could end in tears very, very quickly. Yeah. But we should keep an eye on this as well.
And I'll just say that somebody in the UK column chat room has said, well, if all of this public infrastructure is being sold off and that's generating a revenue stream, why haven't my taxes gone down? Well, of course, we have no idea who's actually collecting the revenue. Is that going into public sector coffers, or is it going into people's back pockets? We don't know, and the Treasury doesn't seem to know. But we're able to announce today, and we have tweeted out, that we've been told on extremely good authority that everybody within the European Union, so that includes UK, has been allocated a European Union tax code. And the implication is that there is now going to be movement for taxation through the European Union. And of course, one of the principal drivers for that is to pay for the new European military structure. So I think we've got to say, Mike, that David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives has been absolutely spot on with warning about what they're trying to produce with the combined military in the EU. Next step, the EU Treasury. And if you're doing that, you're going to tax people.
Yes. Now, at the heart of all this, of course, has been the common purpose with a small c and small p, and common purpose, the organisation itself. And we've been particularly concerned over the years about their influence in local councils, in national government, and in fact in prisons. Well, this is Novus. Novus Cambria awarded learning and skills contract for HMP Berwyn. Now, this is just the latest. This has just been announced today. This is just the latest of these types of learning and skills contracts going into prisons and allegedly training prisoners. And in what? Well, that's another question. But this one piqued my interest. Who are Novus? Well, Novus are, this is what they are. They are part of the Manchester College Group, TNE Group. Trading as Manchester, they are trading as of Manchester College. And who is Manchester College? Well, here they are. This is one of their campuses, Northenden campus. They are a huge organisation with 100 locations across the country. Absolutely huge private educational establishment. Well, this is Northenden campus. And why are we interested in that? Well, indeed, here is Common Purpose Manchester, and they are in fact based at Northenden campus of the Manchester College. So what we have here, Brian, is more evidence of common purpose ideology, shall we say, being pumped directly into prisons, into prisoners' minds. What is the likely outcome of that?
The likely outcome of that, Mike, is that we're going to have prisoners who are not trained. We're going to have prisoners who are reframed. They're going to have an extraordinary belief in their own ability. And these people, with assuming they're not reformed, and we could have a We could have a discussion about whether that will happen or not, but these people will then be moved through and allocated leadership positions in society. So you'll have people from a variety of criminal backgrounds. It might be common theft or it might be child abuse, but these people will be reframed in a political agenda and then brought across into society. We're going to have just a break, as it were, for some adverts, but after that, we're going to be looking in detail at how this system works. So the key to it is not to think in terms of common purpose training, although that is still going on. The key is to think in terms of mental reframing. And of course, the dangerous weapon is the political use of neuro-linguistic programming to actually change people's views, values and belief structures in line with what the government thinks. So this is a very, very dangerous agenda. And if people want more information on what Common Purpose has been up to in prisons, have a look at the cpexposed.com website, because if I remember correctly, there is documentation there showing Common Purpose running training courses inside Hull prison. And of course, at the time, questions were asked, what's this training for? Nobody wanted to answer. So what can we do? Well, we are going to say people need to understand what's happening in the country. And the first thing to understand is that the United Kingdom is now a lawless state. So if we take the example of the sell-off of public infrastructure with no proper audited accounts, this, of course, is criminal activity at the highest level within the government, but we could choose many other examples. So key part of the November the 19th event is to take the lid off the state of the country, but then to have a look at what we should be doing in order to turn things round. Now, this is one of the key points, and we really need to be pushing this very, very hard. It's no good being at home worried on your own, not sure what to do about it. You need to be joining up with other people, 2, 3, 4 or more, in order to discuss what's going on, in order to give each other mutual support. And ultimately, if we are fighting a government-installed network of new future leaders, the way to do that is to infiltrate it with another network. So are things moving? Well, we're delighted to say they are. And a couple of adverts here. There's a new rule of law forum started in Totnes, which we've mentioned a couple of times. We've also got activity started in Telford and Shropshire, so that's very good. And we're also we'd also like to say a big thank you to the team in Penzance Truth Movement, who of course have been working for years in order to help educate people as to what's really happening in UK. And talking of the Penzance Truth Movement, this Saturday, a talk on the NHS, which I'll be joining in. Details are here on screen. But if you are in the West Country and can get down to the tip of England, or Cornwall, probably I should say, then please come and join us.
You get shot for that.
I probably won't, actually. I think we'll get away with it. So if that is the good news, well, let's have a look at how the UK is being broken apart, and what better person to bring on screen than David Cameron. And we had the news yesterday, I think it came out the day before. David Cameron has landed his first job after quitting Parliament, with a role pushing for expansion of his pet national service project. So this is really key stuff, because this is an unpaid role with one of the planks of his Big Society agenda. And this is Telegraph. So if you want to check through on this, have a look in the Daily Telegraph. So Cameron is to chair the NCS patrons body, driving expansion of the scheme. And the announcement comes as the government introduces a national citizen service bill to create a royal charter for legal footing. So this is the formalisation of this network. And as we're going to see, what are they doing? They are training the future leaders who are then going to be selected. So let's bring him back on screen, and we just add this bit into it. So if you go and have a look for the National Citizen Service, you can find it on the gov.uk website. As far as the image of selling it, it's all about children going out and doing wonderful but tough outdoor activities, when the reality is that actually it is a model of common purpose training whereby these youngsters are going to be taken through a reframing exercise to make them better people, so they learn how to serve the state. And when they've learned that lesson, then they can graduate, where they will be put on a special list and given special promotion up the social ladder. It's pretty apparent what's going on here, and we could call it Hitler Youth Light, I think is probably a reasonable description. So what sort of man is David Cameron? Well, of course, he said that we should all be ready for change. He's a change agent. Well, what we've got to remember is that the undeclared change is the destruction of democracy and the imposition of big society. So this tactic of calling for change, but you never describe what you're changing from to, you just call for change. This is, of course, the disruptive state. And this is the man at the back of it, Saul Alinsky. It's an open secret that Saul Alinsky doctrine has been used within the Labour Party and within the Conservative Party. It's the driving agenda for the big society. And Alinsky advocated rubbing communities raw to create the tension necessary for, quote, revolutionary change. So if you wonder why we live in such aggressive, unhappy communities, because everything the government is doing at the moment is to make sure that that tension is there. And Alinsky also said that anything was acceptable to achieve the ultimate political goal. So a little bit of fraud in the treasury would be ideal, selling off the public infrastructure, destroying the NHS, all of that. Good news, because that helps you on your way. And I think we're allowed to say, Mike, that we have warned and warned what's going on. So this is one of the UK column articles back in March 2012, when we said we're faced with domestic terrorists in suits, and their agenda was to destroy Britain and all those who regard themselves as British. And perhaps I'll just add to that, don't be fooled by the statement of British. It doesn't matter what colour you are, what religion you are, if you are not adhering to the new political policy, the government is going to be out to get you. And we suggested the correct approach was to get rid of them. And we're warning, of course, that these people don't have to look like sort of armed revolutionaries. Most of them are white males in smart suits who do the dirty deals from inside their offices. It's quite creepy, Mike, isn't it? When you see these people's picture together, there's just something about them.
Yeah, so we got Cameron and Osborne and Clegg, and who's that? Who's the fat man in the centre?
William Hague. Mr. Pickles will be coming on. Be coming on to.
So these are the usual suspects, and if we're talking localism and big society, it is these 9 people that really were at the heart of it, and continue to be so.
Yeah, indeed. And before we just go on to the next part, let's just remind ourselves that everything here is around profit and capitalism. And if you haven't come across the Henry Jackson Society, that is a very good place to start. We just chose this as one article where people are meeting behind closed doors with the McKinsey Institute, for example, and the Rothschilds, in order to say, we need to improve the way that capitalism is working. And there's the statement towards a more inclusive capitalism. If you're going to make everything under that system, we've got to sell off, of course, all the public infrastructure, which is what's happening. So for those of a weak disposition, look away, because here he is. And what did Eric Pickles say publicly? He said, I know I look like an unlikely revolutionary, but the revolution starts here. And this, of course, Mike, is exactly what we're now starting to see. But this is a revolution by subversion. And part of his comment went on, we're going to shake up the balance of power in this country. We're going to change the nature of the Constitution. Remarkable coincidence that that's happening. Be in no doubt about our commitment to localism. So we just get the right terms in here, because to change the Constitution by subversion is treason. And this is the man who's been at the heart of that.
Indeed.
Well, I'll just pause because it's all been there in the public arena. So let's have a look at how they've put this together. This was the UK column's exposure in 2013, exposing the big lie of Big Society. And in that diagram, we did our best to show all of the key elements of David Cameron's Big Society. But let's remember that everything is based on the Marxist Saul Alinsky, the man who says anything goes in your drive to create his new society. So these are the elements, but of course you need money. So we've got Big Society capital formed on the right. And who's involved? Reliable, honest banks like HSBC, Mike. Just the people to take over a bit of public infrastructure.
HSBC, Barclays, Lloyds, RBS, all the best, highest quality bankers available. All
the best bankers brought in to help us build a better society. Then we had this commission for the compact, and people really need to read some of this documentation, people signing up to be part of the compact. And what have we got? Community empowerment, national citizen service pilots, there we are, opening up public services, privatisation, community first fund, building the third sector, and a social investment market. So if we just come up through so we can see, we've labelled a bit of it there, creeping state legislation and doctrine to control our lives. And if we come up a bit more, we've got on the left, if I can just mark that, here we are. Here's the National Citizen Service, now to be driven by David Cameron. And at the time we went to print here, excuse me, they were talking about having 90,000 young people trained as future leaders. And those young people would then be selected to go through a fast track into positions of power in government. It's all democratic, open, Mike?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And we'd labelled it quite correctly, the big lie. Now, if you doubt this is going on, let's jump back to the Telegraph, which had an article in 2008 saying that children aged 8 were being enlisted as council snoopers. So the children were recruited and trained by a number of councils to report on environmental offences, such as putting out the wrong rubbish, dropping litter, etc.
Did Hitler use children that young?
Yes, he did. He did, Mike, actually. If you go through and you have a look at how Hitler Youth got off the ground and the fact that they then started to say it'd be better if we bred our own children, they certainly started young. So this is part of that Telegraph article, which is that children were now covert human intelligence resources. That was the label the children were given by the local authorities. And there was some pretty powerful comment from this gentleman, Matthew Sinclair, from the Taxpayers Alliance. He said in that article, recruitment of children is downright sinister. We're deeply troubled by these developments. They're straight out of the Stasi copybook. There is a combination of ever stricter rules and even more draconian attempts to control people. So we're going back 2008, and this man at least was clearly seeing the danger of what's being proposed. So how can we take this through and bring it up to date? Well, thank you very much to John Galloway, who emailed this through to us. He said, are you aware of Uprising? Which we weren't. And what's it got to say? Well, this is part of the website, obviously, supporters and partners. But I thought, Mike, you'd be pleased to see our old friend Common Purpose well up on the sheet. And I encourage people to go to this website and have a look at these very strange third sector charity partners with weird names, but they're all about training our young people. And there we have another university involved, the
Yes.
University of Birmingham. So uprising sounds as though somebody is driving a subversive agenda. Who would that be? Well, if you're going to have a little look on the website, there's a very nice photograph of a lot of the graduates, and they say this: Uprising is a UK-wide youth leadership development organisation. Our mission is to open pathways to power for talented young people from diverse and underrepresented backgrounds. We equip them with the knowledge, network, skills and confidence to fulfil their leadership potential, find new opportunities and transform the world around them through social action. Well, of course, in the background was none other than Mr. Cameron. He's now working for an uprising, and the founding patrons of this wonderful organisation surprisingly include David Cameron, Nick Clegg and Ed Miliband. So there they are on screen. So men who can't govern the country, we can't have a stable, prosperous country, we can't have a proper NHS, but they're working together in the background to train children out of sight of their parents. This is pretty creepy stuff, to use some simplistic language.
If you have someone who is if you're being kindest to him, is an incompetent leader, and he is then training the next generation of leaders, what do you get?
Well, you're going to get mayhem, is what you're going to get. But we can follow this through, because let's bring that lovely picture on screen again. If you have a little look through the website, you will find this document written by Demos, the old friends of Common Purpose. And now we're getting into the meat of it, because what's the title? The Power of Uprising, an interim report, where Demos boasts that they've spoken to these leaders. So have a look through these names: Lord Victor
Abadwali.
Thank you. We've got politicians, we've got chief executives of third sector companies, we've got a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, the big auditing company. Apparently these are leaders, and their opinion on the training counts. So Demos, formerly a Marxist organisation, I believe, is commenting. And they say, we have evidence that uprising works and that our impact is both immediate and long-term. Our young people are already achieving positions of power. There's that word, power, not service, power, securing new opportunities and transforming their communities. And the spelling mistake is theirs, not mine. So are we reading this wrong, do you think? Or
No.
Have we got a conspiracy at work here?
Criminal conspiracy.
A criminal conspiracy. Well, we were told, the man who told us was, of course, Tony Blair. He said in the year 2000 that he had a vision of a new Britain, and central to the vision was the creation of a new class, a new elite placed in positions of authority who will propagate the new spirit of the age and spread the principles of the third way. That's Alinskyite talk across Britain. So Tony Blair knew it was coming. And if we have a look at our old friend Julia Middleton from Common Purpose, she said in 2007, I know that in Downing Street, they're always wondering whether people have sufficient guile to be brought into a coalition the government is building. How do you think they would be using the word guile here?
Well, in a subversive way.
Yeah, it's a devious term, isn't it? It's slightly devious. Are you devious enough to be part of our coalition? Why would Julia Middleton be privy to what the government is discussing? Well, of course, she was having closed-door meetings, or Sir David Bell of Common Purpose was having the closed-door meetings with Francis Maude. And in those meetings, they discussed training the top 200 civil servants in the ideology of Common Purpose.
So we've got current leaders in civil service trained, we've got business leaders trained, we've got the next generation coming up being trained, we've got prisoners being trained by Common Purpose.
Yeah.
Does that leave anyone?
Well, the aim is that nobody's going to be left out, which is why we have Every Child Matters, for example. Nobody's to be left out of that system. But the bad news is if the government can't train you to the ideology the government wants, then you're going to have to be probably euthanized.
Okay, well, this has all been about localism, how localism's coming about. Let's move on a little bit from this because, of course, while all this is going on at the same time, we're continuing to see elected mayors and the pressure for elected mayors, which is more of a global agenda. We'll come on to that in a second. This is a referendum taking place in Guildford today on whether Guildford should have an elected mayor. Of course, Guildford is, what is it, combined authority, I think it is, Guildford County Council, Guildford Borough Council, sorry, which means that they allegedly have a leader who's an elected councillor. He's chosen by a vote of the other elected councillors, and they have an executive, and the councillors are supposed to hold the executive to account. But that's going to be replaced with what's effectively a chief executive, I suppose, is a better term rather than mayor, because he will be the great leader, the great policy setter, the great agenda setter, and he will bring the council forward, and he will have he will choose what's the word?
A cabinet,
or his team, yes,
yeah.
Exactly. His team, he will choose them and move on. Well, we have been warning about this particular aspect of this agenda for quite some time, and of course, most recently in a couple of articles discussing the Global Parliament of Mayors. This article is on the front page of the website, down near the bottom, if you want to go and have a look at it. But just to take a couple of points out of this, what is this global movement about? It is a global movement. They're talking about glocalism, not localism, but glocalism. And this is, again, centralized control, not at the national level taken to the local level, but we're talking about global centralized control taken to the local level. So what they're aiming for is a planet ruled by cities, which represents a new paradigm of global governance, of democratic localism rather than top-down imposition, of horizontalism rather than hierarchy. That's how they describe it, but of course, that's not quite how it is in practice. And of course, they're talking about interdependence rather than outworn ideologies of national independence. The foundation for this new world are being erected now. And they go on to say, you know, the drive towards elected UK mayors represents the rising tide of the benign-sounding global governance model. This is a UN-imposed dictatorship masquerading as part of our national democracy. As we've consistently pointed out, co-conspirators include those trained by pseudo-education, political charity, common purpose. The future role of mayors will be to protect the global interests dictated by the UN Agenda 2030, which is Agenda 21 on steroids. And that's really taking it to the next step. That's where it ends up.
Right, what's interesting with this is that I think that UK Column has consistently been well ahead of the game in talking about what's happening. The advantage now is that we can actually see by examples unfolding each week that this is the system that's coming into force. Where do we end today's news? Well, we think we're at the tipping point, and this is the best way we could have a look at what's actually happening. We go to the right of the seesaw, and we've put right at the top, of course, the fraudulent banks, because without control of the money supply, without the fraud and corruption in the banks, none of the political agenda could be working. But what is dangerous in that? Well, we have everything from Big Society, with the heavyweight Eric Pickles, who, of course, he has been one of the major drivers. So he's added his considerable weight to that agenda, even though I think the Telegraph described him as a pink geisha. I don't quite know how they work that out, but there we go. We've got fraud, corruption, perversion, the state stealing people's children. We've got secret courts. We've got the common purpose networks. We've got change agents. We've got the elected mayors, of course, which you've covered, Mike. We've got the media and propaganda. We've got behavioural change. And we've got the linking together of these agencies. So MAPPA, the multi-agency public protection arrangement, dovetailing the police and mental health services in with supposedly social services. Same with those multi-agency support hubs, MASH. We're now replacing the police with private security companies. So this is some of the weight on one side of the pivot point. What's the good news? Well, the good news is there's a lot of good people who are quite capable of stopping what's happening if they understand what is actually being done. So we've put 40 million good people there. We've still got some good politicians, although I would say they're all cowards. We've got some very good people in the public sector. They need to be encouraged to speak out. And we've got to really get to grips with who's controlling money in the country. And of course, we've got to protect our constitution and common law. So the tipping points on screen, we've probably got democracy and freedom on one side, but what we can safely say is on the other side, there's corporate fascism ready to go. And I think probably in today's news, we've taken our audience about as close to the picture as to what's happening as we can. So we're on a knife edge. What does it depend on? It depends on all of us to stand up and be counted, to speak out, and ultimately, of course, to stop what's happening everywhere we discover it. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of today's news. We will be back at 1 o'clock tomorrow. If you're not signed up as a subscriber to UK Column, perhaps you consider doing that. We do need your support to keep doing what we're doing. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.